When both major original Yu-Gi-Oh! Protagonists received heavy upgrades to their so-called second-tier iconic decks via the new movie, it did not take long to come to the conclusion that Yugi probably got second pick, so to speak, for not only was Kaiba's Blue Eyes support generally superior to Yugi's Dark Magician support, but his new Alphabet Machine archetype, ABCs, was viewed as far superior to Yugi's new Electromagnet Warriors. However, it is important to note that while ABCs can be viewed as a superior deck, the new Electromagnet Warrior archetype is certainly no pushover thanks to its overall speed, ability to clear boards, and some of the nice tricks other monsters can bring to the table to support it. For the purpose of this deck, I'm going to ignore the original vanilla Magnet Warriors because they have become power creeped quite significantly, and I do not see them having value. So starting with the new Electromagnetic Warriors, Alpha is more important than most people may realize, for it nets a free +1 when normal or special summoned through its Valkyrion or Berserkion search, which is actually rather important, especially in a deck that involves the incorporation of fusion summoning Imperion. Also at 1700, it is the major hitter of the Electromagnet family, level 4 or lower, that is worth running. Again, I forego running the vanillas. Run 3 copies of Alpha. Beta is a solid card with a level 4 or lower Magnet Warrior +1 search when normal or special summoned. However, outside of its Magnet Warrior name and search, Beta is really not that useful. However, the search and name are definitely enough to demand running 3 copies. In the average Magnet deck, Gamma's summons effect is rather inconsistent, but with some of the support that can be combined with this deck, its inconsistency melts away, making Gamma rather useful, especially for making rank 3 plays. Even if this were not the case, thanks to the Magnet Warrior in the name and its dependency to summon Berserkion from the hand, 3 copies would basically be mandatory anyways. Note that all 3 new Magnet Warriors do have secondary effects that can be activated during the opponent's turn to summon a level 4 Magnet Warrior to the field from the deck by tributing itself. In the past, this effect was rather meaningless, only able to target the 3 normal Magnet Warriors, but with the release of Delta and Raging Tempest, these effects now have value largely at speeding Berserkion summoning and giving it sufficient fuel to use to clear field. The new boss monster of the Magnet Warrior family, Berserkion, is definitely a high-quality monster wielding 3,000 attack points and a destruction effect that can be used as many times as fuel exists, banishing a Magnet Warrior from the graveyard. The nice thing about the summoning effect is that it does not matter if the Magnet Warrior are in hand, on the field, or in the graveyard, making summoning more consistent. In a sense, Berserkion reminds one of Dark-Armed Dragon for its ability to clear entire fields just with its own destruction effect, opening the door for large damage plays. The destruction effect also puts the opponent in a tough spot from time to time, because if they can only remove this guy via destruction, even a card like Solemn Strike, his death will not be in vain, for he can then summon 1 copy of each of the new Electromagnet Warriors from the Banish Zone. Largely this will be the 3 that you used to summon him in the first place, which will trigger all of their effects as well, netting some nice pluses. While ABC Dragon Buster is probably better due to its overall versatility and quick play effect, the gap between it and Berserkion is not as widespread as one might think. If this deck were not a fusion build, then running 2 copies would be appropriate to avoid hand clogging, but since this is a fusion build, 3 copies. Personally, I think Delta is receiving a little too much praise in the argument of Delta's release makes this deck playable now. Make no mistake, Delta is definitely a quality addition, speeding the ability to get Berserkion on the field and feeding its effect through Delta's Foolish Burial specific effect, which is rather efficient due to the secondary summons effect possessed by Alpha, Beta, and Gamma, but this deck has always been playable. In addition, its ability to replace itself with a Valkyrion when destroyed can produce some level of trepidation for the opponent when attempting to remove it from the field. However, in my experience, you really don't want Delta in your hand. Instead, you want to rely on summoning it from the deck via one of the 3 Magnet Warriors effects. Thus, I only run 2 copies to maximize efficiency. Valkyrion in this deck is basically just a beat stick and fusion material, for its effect is irrelevant without the original Magnet Warriors in the deck. However, both of these elements, beat stick and fusion material, are certainly important for the deck's success. Therefore, I run 3 copies. Super Conduction Machine Imperion Magnum is the big bad of the deck. It has a negation effect similar to Quasar that stops any effect anywhere, once per turn during either player's turn, and while it can only attack once, when it is removed from the field by opponent card effect, it gets to summon one Berserkion and one Valkyrion from the hand or deck to the field, and better yet, their effects aren't negated. So Berserkion, if he's got fuel, the second your turn rolls around, he can start popping stuff. In a lot of respects, if the opponent does not have a kaiju in hand, or a way to get a card like 101 or Cyber Dragon Infinity on the field to suck up Imperion in a sense, then Imperion is an absolute pain in the butt for the opponent, because not only will it drain resources and do big damage in life, but it also does the same in death, bringing that Berserkion and Valkyrion out from the hand or deck. Right now I run 2 copies because I rarely have use for a third copy, but 3 copies are fine too. For the remaining monsters, the least surprising entry is 1 copy of Giant Sentry of Stone. The ability to summon it from the graveyard at no cost, with the only condition being nothing but rock monsters on your field, is very effective for this deck, especially for making rank 3 XZ plays. The great thing about Sentry is that it does not matter what's in your graveyard, only what's on your field to receive its graveyard summons effect. Also, summoning Giant Sentry of Stone will allow you to net a free, kind of cheap 1300 damage against an opponent's cleared field, usually achieved by Berserkion's effect, before then going into a rank 3 during your main phase 2. However, I only run 1 copy to maximize efficiency because its effect can only be activated once per turn, and outside of its graveyard summons effect, the card really isn't good. Another great monster, in my opinion, for this deck is Dokidoki. While Dokidoki is only a level 2 500 attack monster, its summons from the deck effect dramatically increases the speed and efficiency of this deck. Discard 1 Magnet Warrior from the hand to summon another Magnet Warrior, or even one of the same name from the deck, to increase both Fusion and Berserkion summoning speed, as well as potentially giving him fuel to use his effect. Dokidoki also helps address my personal annoyance of drawing a delta into the hand. Overall, I feel Dokidoki is an essential monster to increasing the overall effectiveness of this deck. 3 copies. Addressing Dokidoki's usefulness with Delta, I run 1 copy of Fossil Dyna, which can help neutralize special summoning by the opponent and the resultant threats that may come after Imperion or Berserkion has hit the field. I run 1 copy of Block Dragon, which is an exceptional monster for this deck, for its summons cost is commonly less demanding than it initially seems because it can use graveyard earth monster. For example, after summoning an Imperion, you already have 2 rocks in the graveyard and 1 Berserkion and 1 Valkyrion that you more than likely will not ever need again. Block Dragon helps support both Berserkion and Imperion on the field via its rock monsters can't be destroyed by card effect portion of its effect, and when it leaves the field for the graveyard, its search effect can set up a rather explosive next turn play, or even simply provide the necessary fuel for it to summon itself back to the field from the graveyard. Overall, there are a number of times I lament only running 1 copy, but I'm a 40 card deck player as well, and this deck's pretty tight as it is at 40 cards. Closing out the monsters, I ask the following rhetorical question. Does this deck run Polymerization for fusion monster summoning purposes? The answer being yes, then Gofu is always a solid option, providing field presence, Synchro opportunity, especially with the level 2 Dokidoki removing him as a small liability just sitting there at 500 attack points in attack mode, and the level 3 Magnet Warriors to make 7 and 8 Synchro plays respectively, in addition to fusion opportunities to summon First of the Dragon using the tokens. I like 2 copies of Gofu in the deck. For the spells, because this deck is fusion-based for bringing out Imperion, I run 3 copies of Polymerization and 1 copy of Fusion Recycling Plant, which is an excellent card in this deck at 1 copy. With the ability to search the graveyard for Polymerization, one may wonder, why the 3 Polymerizations over 3 Fusion Recycling Plants and 1 Polymerization? For one, the discard is meaningful. Second, Recycling Plant can get hit by a spell or trap removal both and at any general time or when you activate its effect, which has burned your discard, and the single Polymerization can be removed via a card like DD Crow, which is becoming somewhat popular as a side deck choice, and once you lose that 1 Polymerization, you're shut out of one of the best fusion monsters in the game. So I like 3 copies of Polymerization over the 3 copies of Fusion Recycling Plant. In addition, I like Polymerization over a card like Fusion Gate because of Recycling Plant's ability to return a Berserkion to hand and as fuel for Block Dragon summoning.
To speed fusion summoning, I run 2 copies of Fusion Conscription to add either Valkyrion or Berserkion. Because the intent is to use either one as fusion material, the inactivation-based restriction is not overly relevant, but it still speeds the acquisition of Berserkion to the hand in case you need to set up his summons and or fuel to bring him out during your next turn. I run 2 copies of Magnetic Field and 2 copies of Terraform. Magnetic Field, deceptive quality in this deck, especially its costless, low-condition Magnet Warrior Graveyard Summons effect, which makes XZ plays rather easy and can generate significant advantage through activation of the Magnet Warrior effect. This is another reason why I favor the 3 polymerizations over Fusion Recycling Plant, because you don't want Fusion Recycling Plants to be clogging your hand, and you typically don't want it to be sitting on the field when you could Magnetic Field instead. The second effect can also be rather useful against quality extra deck monsters, bouncing them back. Not surprisingly, I run 1 copy of Raigeki for board clearance, 1 copy of Upstart Goblin for speed, as the extra 1,000 life points for the opponent is almost immaterial for the damage this deck can deal out, 1 copy of Foolish Burial to dump Giant Sentry of Stone, Block Dragon, or a Magnet Warrior to speed Berserkion summoning, and 1 copy of Trade-In for while dumping Berserkion or Valkyrion is not the greatest idea, sometimes you're not set up for the fusion summons and you need the extra draws. Also, Fusion Recycling Plant will allow you to add either one back to the hand during the end phase of a turn when Imperion was summoned, making Trade-In live during the next turn, and if you dump Block Dragon, Trade-In becomes a quasi-Pot of Greed. Finally, I run the 1 copy of Vanity's Emptiness because Kaiju equals bad for this deck, and there's a number of cards that can create a nice Vanity soft lock that makes it very difficult for your opponent to play. It is worth noting that I do not run any of the new Electromagnet spell or trap support beyond the field spell because I just don't think it's good enough to get the job done. Let's discuss why. The biggest problem for Magnet Reverse is that it does not ignore summoning conditions, so you have to properly summon the targeted monster first. Unfortunately, this card is much better suited for the ABC deck over Electromagnet Warrior deck because ABC Dragon Buster is a much more effective monster to utilize with this effect versus Berserkion, both due to the ease of summon and the overall fuel for its effect. Imperion, unfortunately, cannot be summoned by Magnet Reverse, and there really is nothing in the extra deck worth summoning with this card's effect. Understandable, though, if it did ignore summoning conditions, Magnet Reverse would probably be broken. Magnet Force is not that useful in this deck because both Imperion and Gorgonic Guardian do a fine job of squashing potential monster effect activation by the opponent, and Block Dragon also helps pick up the slack by making rock monsters immune to monster effects that would destroy. Magnet Conversion is not a bad card for this deck, but it's just too slow in my opinion. You can somewhat get away with it because of Gamma's effect, but still a little too slow for my taste. The Banish effect is solid, but not great. If any new magnets are released, then this card may become worth it, but right now, it's a no in my opinion. For the remaining extra deck, other than Imperium, I run 1 First of the Dragons, 1 Vermillion Dragon Mech, 1 Scarlight Red Dragon Archfiend, 1 PSY-Framelord Omega, 1 Stardust Spark Dragon, 1 Clearwing Synchro Dragon, 1 Black Rose Moonlight Dragon, 1 number 38 Hope Harbinger Dragon Titanic Galaxy. Typically you're going to make this off of Valkyrion and a Berserkion that have come to the field after Imperion has been removed, 1 Phantom Knights of Breaksword, 1 Leviair the Sea Dragon, 2 Gorgonic Guardians. I only ever really have a need for 2. I'm rarely in a situation where it's like, man, it'd be nice if I had that third, but I can definitely see people valuing that third copy over a monster like Stardust Spark Dragon. And 1 Giant Soldier of Steel. Overall, this deck is one of those tricky, don't judge a book by its cover decks, for while it initially may not look like much on paper, after playing with it for a while, one realizes how dangerous the deck can be regardless of what the opponent is running. With the ability to commonly drop both a Gorgonic Guardian and an Imperion in the same turn, the deck can produce solid boards that, even when broken, can produce significant levels of follow-up. Also, this deck design has the ability to drop powerful effect monsters in Berserkion, powerful fusion monsters, strong XZ monsters, and even quality Synchro monsters, creating a significant level of overall efficiency and versatility that rival some of the more celebrated decks, and can really put the opponent in a bind if they're trying to depend on Dimensional Barrier to stall your playmaking. When the new Link rules hit the game this coming summer, the ability to access monsters like Berserkion and Block Dragon, in addition to the field presence this deck can generate through Dokidoki and Gofu, will help accelerate this deck past other top decks that may not be able to adjust as well. Well, that is my Electromagnet Warrior deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.